It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years. If you can tell, I got a little more pep in my step than I did last week. Part of that is because every NFL team has now opened training camp. And I got to tell you, I am thrilled that I'm not 320 pounds out there in the heat running into other 320-pound guys. I would much rather be in my air condition talking with the great John Daigle, who you can find on social media at NotJDaigle. And for the second week in a row, we have on another fantasy superstar guest that John has brought on. Today, it is Rich Hribar at Lord Reeves, who does a terrific job and has for years. I don't know, Rich, is this the first time we've met, or you've been on? I feel like you've been on the show before, but maybe I'm mistaken.
I was on way back in yesteryear when Evan was still doing it with you. So it's been a while since I've been on. You know, not to hijack the show, but I'd be curious to get your take. You know, we saw Tyrann Mathieu retire yesterday, CJ Mosley a couple weeks ago. How much does this timing of the year, trying to motivate yourself, you know, to go into training camp, to kind of go in and put this work in again, kind of play into some of these guys, like saying like, oh, I just don't know if I'm up for it to do this again?
It is a terrific question. And by the way, you can follow Rich on social media at Lord Reeves. He does a terrific job for Warren Sharp, who everybody knows comes on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, as well as the Even Money Betting Podcast. You can follow me at Ross Tucker NFL and us at Ross Tucker Pod. There's always a few guys, Rich, that retire this time of year because, you know, especially a guy like Tyrann Mathieu who's made so much money. And it's funny because it's not nearly as arduous as it used to be. It's still the worst time of the year for those guys. It's still like a 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. time commitment, but physically it's not nearly as grueling. I guess I always think for a guy like Mathieu, and again, he's made so much money, but he went through the OTAs and minicamp, right? So like this, I don't know where this comes from, because to me, if you're going to retire, why go through the OTAs and minicamp? If you go through the OTAs and minicamp and you get to this point, he is roughly 6 weeks away, maybe 7, from having his 2025 salary fully guaranteed because he's a vested veteran in year 5 or later. Man, I think he's a very bright guy, and he was on the show last year, and he's already figuring out what he wants to do post-football. He was at the NFL broadcast workshop a year ago. But that's a good question. Maybe I'll make a note for producer Jack. I'm going to try to get him on the show because I do think the timing of that is interesting. Now, some guys will retire because they're like told they're going to get cut, right? Like, you know, Noah Fant got released by the Seahawks. If he was an older guy, some of the guys in that situation are like, I don't want to get released. I don't want to be, you know, trying to scrape. I'm just going to retire then. I don't think that was the case for the Saints, because it sounded like Mickey Loomis was a little bit caught off guard by that. Mm-hmm. Speaking of caught off guard, we're going to dive into some of the news from training camp so far and some of the off-the-field stuff. John, I'll let you take the keys to start this thing off. But it's funny because your first question, John, because John and I were texting and emailing, is exactly what I was thinking too. So go for it, John.
This early training camp news is going to naturally affect how everyone handles their drafts, since it's the time of the year where Rich and I get tagged in for show appearances. Season-long drafts are happening within the next few weeks. And Rich, when people show up, I think they will be questioning how to handle, to start off, the Chiefs wide receivers, given that we're all projecting 2 to 4 games, I think, right now, for a suspension for Rasheed Rice. Historically, we've all been really bad at handling this. We forget that production is most replicable at the beginning of the year when we believe Rice would be handling or undergoing the suspension. So your thoughts overall on Rice, Worthy, and the Chiefs wide receivers in general?
Yeah, it's still kind of tricky because we don't know. We've seen that, Rasheed Rice took the plea agreement, but we still don't know what the suspension is going to be or the length of the suspension. That's like kind of the missing piece that we're still waiting on, and hopefully the NFL kind of moves swiftly. They're not known for moving swiftly. We would hope though that we do know before the season, because getting this information in mid-July for fantasy drafters is a big deal. Like it's not like last year where we're heading into the Week 1 Monday night game and we find out Christian McCaffrey's going on IR, right? And a lot of fantasy gamers are like, oh, what do I do now? So it's nice that this happened and was expedited to at least where gamers know, hey, he's made this agreement. Now we hope to find out the number of games, because that's the key thing. Because if it's like 3 to 4 games, like you said, we've historically been bad at kind of gauging that. I'm dating myself here. I wrote about this way back in 2018 when Julian Edelman was suspended for PEDs. How bad we were at understanding replacement value in fantasy football. Because although Rasheed Rice isn't going to be in your lineup potentially weeks 1 through 3 or 1 through 4, hopefully, at maximum, you're still not taking zeros in your lineup. Like you're still getting replacement value for that player. So you have to think about it of like, how many points does Rasheed Rice score weeks 5 through 17, plus the points you get those weeks that he's in your lineup. And, still through my projections and like even docking him for some of his production, coming off the LCL, saying like, hey, the Chiefs can't rebottle what Xavier Worthy put onto the field into the postseason last year. And even docking him, he still looks like he's like the wide receiver 17-ish, in terms of value for the season. And I think that sounds right. We just need to see if it's not 6 games. When the Chiefs have all these guys in the field, 'cause remember, we didn't get to see the Chiefs operate how they wanted to operate last year. This was a team that had a lot more signal. They were going to play a lot more 11 personnel coming into the year. Hollywood busts his shoulder up in the preseason, can't play. Rasheed Rice goes down in week 4 because they weren't giving they weren't funneling the offense through Travis Kelce like they had to the back half of the year, because they were kind of forced to, a necessity. Now we're kind of in that nebulous zone again. Like, are they going to start the year the way they wanted to, playing a lot more 11 personnel with all these receivers on the field? Because they haven't played a game yet together, Worthy, Brown, and Rice. I would assume that when they're all together, though, it makes sense to kind of have, Rasheed Rice operate in the same capacity that he has, because this is what he did at SMU. And he hasn't really shown that route nuance of, winning on the second and third levels in the NFL. So in Worthy, he still has this question too. He had it back at Texas, winning against man coverage, winning in press, but he still has the spade, which is the speed. And even if you're running bad routes and you're that fast, the defense has to respect you. Like he provides a tactical leverage to the defense. And that just frees up guys like Rice and Kelce underneath. So I would assume he stays in that role when all 3 guys are on the field. But we're just waiting on the last piece of information, which is how many games it gets. And if it's at the start of the season, we don't want this dragging in to where he's missing now time where it's, like you said, when we're trying to make the fantasy playoffs and do things like that. So kind of up in the air, still kind of waiting on, kind of the information. But he's still a guy I would typically take in the 4th round if that's where he's going to fall.
Okay, so I have a question on this for both of you guys. Number 1, what's our best guess that you both have as to how many games it'll be, based on what? But then I've always been curious, is there like an equation for you guys where like every game a guy misses drops them X amount of spots in your rankings or their value? In other words, like if a guy's going to miss 1 game, I'm guessing that doesn't affect that much. But then when you get to 2, how much do you drop them? 3, how much do you drop them? You referenced, Rich, hopefully it's not 6 games.
Yeah.
At what point is the guy not even draftable? At what, like, how is there any type of formulaic way that you guys look at it, as in this many games equals drop him this far in terms of, where you would draft him?
I'll let you go, John.
So for me, if it's 2 to 4 games, again, we are also trying to project when it happens. And I'm just following the tea leaves of guys who know more of that than me. My big source is Drew Davenport, who does handle a lot of these legal issues for fantasy in terms of fallout and describing it on Twitter. In fact, we may even bring him on sometime this week since there are a lot of issues we're trying to sort through, Jordan Addison included. But for Rice, and if it's 2 to 4 games, when it's a player that good, for example, if you just look back at his last 13 games, which basically goes back to his rookie year and the second half of the season when he was in the starting lineup, he did separate as an important player. 27.5% target share, 19.5 fantasy points per game in that time. And so we're talking about a low-end fringe wide receiver 1 that you can now get in the 4th round, who is not going to be your wide receiver 1. It's not like you have to start him again if that suspension happens at the beginning of the year. He's your, you're going to have 6 or 7, if not more, on your roster. So I still think, Rich said 4th round. That's exactly where I was in the ETR Slack yelling that if he falls to the 4th round, he's still a good value there. So it really just depends on the games. And it's a player by player, a situation by situation way to context you need to provide. But for Rice in particular, yeah, I think the 4th round is good value in home leagues.
Yeah, and like the length of games matters because of the way the fantasy football season aligns with when the bye weeks start, which is week 5. Because your roster right now is at the strongest it'll ever be to open the season, so you've got insulation. Like, you probably didn't take a lesser player as your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. Like, you probably still drafted that player with consideration. Like, this is a solid player that also offers upside, and you'll be able to slot that player in. And then when you start getting the bye weeks, that's when you start to miss different pieces of your lineup, and you've got to jostle some things. So that's why we don't want it to bleed into being 5-6 games. I know there was a Chiefs beat reporter Matt Derrick that reported that sources within the organization, they believed it was going to be 2 to 4 games. So hopefully that's optimistic and that's what it will be. But we want it to be front loaded. We don't want it to be a thing like Zeke where he appeals, and we don't think there's going to be appeal in this situation because he took the plea agreement. He's the one that kind of expedited this process. So he should be okay with what was handed down to him. But we just don't want it to come at the end of the year. That's when it matters most.
Don't go anywhere. Got to pay some bills real quick. You know what's delicious? Labatt Blue Light. You know what's even more delicious? Getting incredible Labatt Blue Light merch just for drinking Labatt Blue Light. It is a fantastic tasting beer. By far my favorite light beer. And it goes down so smooth in the summer, especially if it's like ice cold. I keep mine ice cold. Buy beer, get gear. Just get Labatt Blue because it's delicious anyway. And then go to rewards.labattusa.com to rack up the points for exclusive merch. Rewards.labattusa.com. What about Addison, guys? How many games do we think he's going to miss?
I believe 3, right?
Is it 3 for sure?
I think it was like max 3 was like the heaviest the punishment could be.
I think right now in our projections we have 2 baked in. Which, again, the front of the season, but then also, we have to talk about the context of the Vikings offense and what we believe they're going to be this year, and basically adding to their offensive line in order to protect J.J. McCarthy, maybe even slowing the game down this year until he's truly comfortable again. So that's an entirely different situation. And for Rice, it's, again, he has already shown us he can separate as a wide receiver 1 for fantasy, and so we are more willing to take on that risk as opposed to someone like Addison, who's different, although very good.
Well, and the other thing, too, that I just think is interesting, they really want J.J. McCarthy to get off to a great start. Mm-hmm. That's not good that Addison's not there those first few games. Obviously, whoever they play is going to do whatever they can to shut down Jefferson. So then you've got, a situation where McCarthy's really going to have to be able to get it done with the other weapons. So that should be very interesting. All right, John, what else you got?
Another one that I fear is going to trickle into season-long leagues over the next couple of weeks is this new Chris Godwin report opening camp on the team's PUP list because he reportedly underwent another minor knee procedure this spring to have it cleaned out whenever we expected him initially to open camp practicing. Maybe that's why the team went and drafted Emeka Egbuka in the first round. I think there are a lot more reasons to that. But Rich, your thoughts on the Bucs wide receivers and how to handle Godwin and everyone else around him?
Yeah, it's real unfortunate, because you have Godwin on the, kind of the age apex. He's going to be, approaching 30 off of a major injury. I mean, not only did he fracture his ankle, he fractured his fibula and had a deltoid injury as well. Like, all of that was compounded. Just a gruesome injury that takes a lot of recovery. I do think that Egbuka was drafted not only for that, but also, potential insurance. Mike Evans is in a contract year. He's 32. Remember, they had 180 dropbacks last year without either of those guys on the field. Like, people forget, like, that Buck stretch where they were just, like, running the offense through Kate Otten last year, because Jalen McMillan was also down with, like, a hamstring during that period as well. So it was really rough for Baker Mayfield those weeks. I think there's a lot, like you said, that went into the selection of Egbuka in the first round. I'm more worried about not only the injury, but just the change from Liam Cohen, because what Liam Cohen did structurally for the Tampa Bay offense really harnessed, Chris Godwin from a fantasy stance. We just talked about Rasheed Rice and how he got all those, targets near the line of scrimmage, and he's a rugged player who breaks tackles. Is Godwin, coming off of an injury, going to be able to do that? Because he had a career low depth of target last year, a career high 62% of his yards came after the catch because he got more involved near the line of scrimmage. I mean, Baker Mayfield had his fastest time to throw, his lowest ADOT since his rookie year. That was Liam Cohen's plan. We hopefully does something to that with Trevor Lawrence, right? Who was pushing the ball downfield at career high rates last year before he had his shoulder injury. It's also all the moving pieces, not knowing what Josh Grizzard's going to keep in the offense, the age for Chris Godwin coming off of injury, the addition of Egbuka and more target competition. He's just been a really tough click where he goes, even at depressed price. So he's just someone I've been letting a lot of other gamers take, and I'm just saying, if I get beat, I get beat by him. But I think it's definitely the tea leaf says, hey, are we just in like year 8 of undervaluing Mike Evans again? Like, just here we are, because we saw Mike Evans when he came back last year without Chris Godwin, just operated right back in as a wide receiver one again, was absolutely crushing. So wheels up on Mike Evans again is how I'm playing through the situation.
Egbuka also, in most recent drafts, since I've been a part of these high-stakes drafts, is going in rounds 8 through 10. Like, he's already surging because of the Godwin news. Beyond that, we're still waiting on more injuries to trickle out, as every team, like Ross said, reported to camp. And so I'm curious, Rich, just your personal view of training camp right now. Which headline are you monitoring closest as we're trying to sift through all these tea leaves to get our target trees and projections straight?
Well, from the NBC days, the Roto-World background that we have, you're looking for actual reporting first. Like, I would say anything, don't get caught up in anything that's not actual reporting.
Quad photos. Yeah.
Photo, or just like play, opinions. Because sometimes these beat writers got to put out content too. Like, it is what it is. Like, so you're just looking for things that you're actually reporting. Like, hey, this guy was first up in red zone drills. This guy's been consistently getting reps over this player. But you don't want to look at stuff that's like necessarily like based on like, hey, I think Pat Freiermuth could catch 100 balls this year, because there's no, like, these guys aren't making projections. They don't understand like the finite number of touches. It's not their job to understand that stuff. So you're just looking for actual reporting first. The two things I'm looking for most right now is just kind of what's going on with this Najee Harris thing, though. Like, is he Harvey Dent? Is he Kano? Is he just have wear an iPad? We don't know. Like, we haven't seen a picture of him. We don't know what's going on with him. And then the other team that I'm really kind of glued in on is the 49ers. Just kind of what's going on with their wide receivers. Juwan Jennings, is he holding in? Is he going to be on the field participating? John Lynch said he's going to be there today. When does Ricky Pearsall get off of this pup? When does Brandon Ayuk start to practice? And then how good do Trent Williams and CMC continue to trend through this, period of them getting on the field this summer? Because those guys, them being their full go right now is absolutely, significant, especially for CMC, who changed up his offseason regiment, said that he just worked too hard last offseason and did like sprinter drills. And that's what kind of pushed that Achilles tendonitis. So if these guys are going to be on the field to start the season, Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey, like the 49ers offense, I think is going to be severely undervalued again.
What did you guys, John, what did you take from John Lynch saying they're not even close to having any sort of concrete timeline for Ayuk, and what does that mean for him from a fantasy perspective?
I mean, we've only had 2 reports, and they were months apart, because go back to Adam Schefter's podcast in March, whenever he stated that Brandon Ayuk could reportedly be available for the second half of the season. That's already a red flag. And now we get John Lynch coming out and saying that. Not to mention, how many times Ayuk has been stuffed into the doghouse, and sometimes not rightfully so, but he's always been a tumultuous player within that 49ers organization. To me, we've had this argument in the ETR Slack as well, to where, yes, we are dipping him, like we are concerned. To me, though, I'm just going to provide like my own personal context and say I don't want to take part of it. It's a guy that I'm just going to let gloss over personally and let him beat me if he beats me, just because we have to also take into account for season long, like, what is the ramp-up schedule if you were to miss time at the beginning of the year? That also brings on a start-sit headache that you have to solve in your lineup too. So personally, I am going to, at least with the news right now, just not be drafting Ayuk and instead still be hammering Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall in drafts. Rich, I don't know if you have other thoughts on that.
I'm taking them all. I think we know one of these 49ers receivers is going to smash. So I'm like, one of them is going to be underpriced. Like, this system's too good. Yeah, the schedule's too easy for the 49ers this year. Like, they're going to produce points. I mean, especially when you look at what Brock Purdy was able to accomplish last year with just the amount of injuries that offensive line and his wide receivers were constantly in flux, and he still played. Like, he earned that contract last year, Brock Purdy. I know he's like a big topic of discourse around football of like what the chicken or egg, Purdy versus Shanahan. But Purdy, I think, he can create on his own. He plays off script better than any quarterback that Kyle Shanahan's had. I would include RG3 in that motion. Like, RG3 is more athletic, but off script, like being able to throw the football still downfield, like Purdy has that in him. So I've been taking them all. I still go back to with Ayuk. I don't want to completely fade him because of what Puka Nacua did last year. Puka Nacua was hurt. Like, he was coming off injury after the week 1 injury. We didn't get him till like week 8, and he was basically a linchpin of our lineups the back half of the year. So I still think Ayuk has shown us that ceiling. Like, when his head's on straight and he's actually motivated and playing, like, he has upside. And I think from a talent perspective, he's the best of the three. So I don't want to just completely ignore him, but I think there's a lot of nuance to taking brand new. Does your league have IR spots? How many roster spots are you drafting? All those things come into play with that. But I know one of these 49ers guys is undervalued for sure. One of these wide receivers.
I do want to go back and touch on Amari and Hampton, which I know is hard to talk about in concrete right now, just because we're still waiting on any hard news on Najee Harris. We basically only have what his agent filtered through reporters at this time, and then Harbaugh's press conference the other day. But right now, if you were drafting within the next week, how would you handle Amari and Hampton? Because I think there is this tier of players in the back of the first round and that first, second round turn of Devon Achane, Derrick Henry, Bucky Irving, Christian McCaffrey for home leagues even, that I'm taking for sure ahead of Amari and Hampton. But I do think if this news were to continue to be negative for Najee Harris going into the regular season, that Hampton should fit into that next tier of guys: Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs, Kyron Williams.
And that's where I believe he's going to end up, which will probably end up being a little bit too rich for me. Because still on a lot of my end stuff, like his high-end outcomes looks more like he is in more of like the Josh Jacobs zone, which is still really good, right? Like, you're still happy if you get a Josh Jacobs outcome. But Josh Jacobs has always been one of those players that, like, kind of like T. Higgins, like, you play the oscillation game where if like he's undervalued, then overvalued, undervalued, then overvalued, and you try to be in at like the right time of the price point. And now Josh Jacobs is expensive again, so it's like, do we want to go all the way back in? Because Hampton to me looks like a lot. He's in a big pocket of guys where I think he's very similar. Like, I think he's a similar outlook to James Conner. We talked about Josh Jacobs, a Kenneth Walker, a Chuba Hubbard, maybe a Joe Mixon. And if he just ends up being the most expensive of that tier, I'm just happy to kind of play the arbitrage game. I do get the bull case for Amari and Hampton, because if you look at like him compared to Ash and JT, like, and if he just had the full runway, there's no Najee Harris, you can argue that his situation is better, right? Like, still a run-heavy offense, with Greg Roman. The offensive line is better than the Raiders, and the team's going to be projected to score more points than the Raiders. So it's easy to kind of talk yourself into saying, like, hey, the upside outcome is there for Hampton, and I get the bull case. I do think when you look at, like, historically, I'm not trying to drag your tweet that you sent out yesterday back into it, but Greg Roman has not incorporated his running backs into the offenses that he's been in, and yeah, there's some context with some mobile quarterbacks, but it's also players that had their career, targets reduced. Guys like LaShawn McCoy, Frank Gore, who were good receiving backs, and then also under Greg Roman just weren't used in the passing game at a high capacity. So do we get that full run out of receptions? Then if we don't get that, we need a lot of touchdowns. The Chargers also have our 32nd ranked schedule this season. for rushing and passing. Like they have an absolute gauntlet this year of opponents. And, part of that is some of the division they play in, but their out of division games are also brutal this year too. So I think if he just gets to the top of that tier, I'm willing to say like, hey, I'll pay for a cheaper piece, a guy like a Connor or a Walker or like a Mixon somewhere in that boat, and then just kind of let the fantasy gods take the wheel.
We have limited time left and so many situations I would love to hang around for the next couple hours and talk to you about. But it's the time of the year where everyone is more or less just wanting to know the most undervalued player, your favorite sleeper. And so let's just give the people what they want. Think about all the ambiguous situations we're trying to figure out in training camp. Packers wide receivers, Texans wide receivers, Bills situation, Jags backfield. Do you have a favorite sleeper that you're taking a shot on because that situation is unknown?
Well, I think out of the ones you laid out, I just think that the best player out of all those guys is still Jayden Reed. Like on all of those nebulous situations, we need still, him to play in more one wide receiver 2 sets. Like, because remember, LaFleur, to the Shanahan system, like these guys don't play a lot of 11 personnel. That's kind of been Jayden Reed's bugaboo. Like on a per play basis, he looks incredible. Josh Downs also is in this bucket as well with the Colts, but they just can't crack that hurdle of being able to get on the field for 1 to 2 wide receiver sets. Like through 2 years of Jayden Reed's career, he's run 7 pass routes on 1 to 2 wide receiver sets.
That's amazing.
That's it. 7 total plays, which is crazy because, he's losing snaps for guys like, Romeo Doubs, players that we know like just don't provide the same upside per touch of Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed looks like mini Deebo Samuel, really. Like it's so like we just got to get him on the field more. But that could happen. Like when I bring up those first 2 year stats, it's like, could he still have a runway? Like, what if Matthew Golden isn't, as a rookie, up to taking on the full role that Christian Watson had? What if Romeo Doubs misses time again, like he has been? Dontavian Wicks still has issues, holding on to the football. I think there's a lot of fluidity with the Packers wide receivers that could still push Jayden Reed's playing time up. I think he's the best player out of all those situations that you named, outside of Nico Collins, because Nico Collins is... You draft him in the first round.
Collins.
So I didn't count him in. I don't consider him as part of your, that equation. So I would still, be willing to bite on Jayden Reed's, depressed ADP, because on a per touch basis, and you go think of that first month he played with a healthier Jordan Love. I mean, he dropped 2 30-point games. I mean, that first game on that terrible field in Brazil, he even had a 40-yard touchdown call back in that game. I just think on an upside per touch basis, like he's a guy that I still like. I have the FOMO like not having him on my teams.
Rich, you are the man. I am stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.